today what we're going to do is I'm going to dry scape this tank. Basically, I'm going to put everything in it except for the plants, water, and the fish. That makes it really easy to take home because this is available as a raffle item, even with all the stuff in it and everything. So you've got basically a nice little project to take home. Take the rocks back out, put it back in the way you want. But take this nice museum quality glass aquarium home and set it up for yourself. But the focus of today's talk is going to be the substrate. Now, planted tanks are great, and they can do a lot for you in terms of filtration. Like the goal, when I started keeping fish, the big goal was always like, how can I make a tank that did not need water change? And in truth, that's a very difficult thing to do. Like because it takes a lot of balancing and a lot of like removing some things and adding some things and stuff to kind of get that perfect balance. But what I've done is I've kind of come up with this system for substrate that keeps the tank good for a long, long period of time. And usually with a planted tank for me, if I tough it out through that first year, it's kind of like raising kids. You know, that first year or two, they're difficult. Yeah, keep an eye on them, you kind of watch them, what happens, but as things start to calm down in there, all the nutrients start to get absorbed by the plants really start to grow, you can make a very stable environment for your fish or shrimp or whatever you like to keep that doesn't eat plants. You can make a really stable environment for them that makes it a very pleasurable thing to keep in your home and much more attractive than maybe plastic plants and stuff like that look pretty too, depending on how you want to do it, but maybe not as useful as a planted tank could be. So let's go ahead and put some junk in. By junk, I mean effective good stuff. So at the very bottom of your tank, you're going to enter a really low oxygen area. All right, so you're going to get different types of bacteria that live in that layer too. And I like to put a little red clay in there. So in the past, I would buy Mexican red clay, like you get at a craft store. And a lot of the dirted tank people, which is a different method, but a lot of the dirted tank people too will also put that stuff in there. And bacteria loves to eat up iron. And you can find a lot of that in this red clay. That's why it's red, it's rust. So now, there's something by, let's see, this is from Aquatics, and it's basically powdered laterite. You can also find powdered red clay powder and stuff too, and it works great. And if you're one of the folks that likes the anoxic stuff, Dr. Novak talks about this stuff quite a lot too, but I like to begin with that, and we're just going to put a smattering here. I'll put a pretty generous amount. I prefer the powder over the clays because what happens with the clays is your plant roots will grow into it, and then you pull out the plants, and it pulls out, they're like pulling out a plug.
Yeah.
So you get a big wad of clay, and it just makes a huge mess. But the powder's great. I like to just do an even coat all around the bottom here. Spread it around. Another thing I like to add right at the bottom is aragonite. Aragonite is a fancy word for crushed coral. You can get it for a bit of money at an aquarium shop. You can get it for a bit less money at Home Depot. Because it's sold not for aquariums there, so they charge a lot less. And this kind of depends on the water that you have. Here in Tennessee, it seems like it helps me buffer the water a little bit better. And the other thing, like another substrate that I'm about to add in here is soil. And the soil substrates tend to make things more acidic. And this kind of balances out the other way. It's not super, super effective. If you want, if you really wanted to do a cichlid tank and you need to get your pH up in an 8 or up in those high numbers, you can add this in bags and put it inside of your whatever you're filtering with. But I like to put a little bit right here at the bottom. I'm going to stab myself in the face. It costs extra for that. I just incorporate this around on the bottom. Okay. There are a couple of different things that people do right at this point. So I'm going to include something called fluorite, fluorite dark. I like there's different colors. I like dark because it goes with the other black substrate and stuff. There's even black, but it costs like $8 more. So we got dark. Dark and black are pretty close. And it also comes in red and stuff. You must rinse this. The other stuff you'll see you put directly into the tank, all the soil substrates and stuff, you just put them right in. This stuff you gotta rinse it. You gotta rinse it, or you'll have a box full of mud that first time you fill up. Now you can't, like if you mess up and you do it, you can fill it up and drain it, fill up and drain it, and eventually it'll start to look right again. But this has already been rinsed out. I'm gonna add it. I like this stuff. It's sort of got it's like sort of a clay base. It lasts for a really long time. It's a lot cheaper than the soil. It wears out a lot slower than the soil. So you can put this at the base of a tank and it will keep it in good shape for a long period of time. And the dark here is like looks like it's a dark brown. I don't think I've actually used the black before. Let's get some scoops going here. So if I was making a video, this would be the point where I cut the camera off and just dump the bucket. I don't usually have witnesses. You want to put a generous portion, like that. Your end game with this planted tank should be about at least an inch. I'd say maybe 2, sometimes 3 inches of substrate. The more you've got down here, the more your roots can run around. So even if you've got this whole thing covered in wood, but you've got some stuff with heavy root feeders like crypts or something like that, that can run around all under that substrate. It gives it a lot of room. The more room you give it to grow, the more you'll get out of it, and the longer it'll last. It's kind of tall. Also, usually have it a little bit. I'm going to stand on my tippy toes. All right, let's see what we got here. If you look online, there are all kinds of aquascaping tools and stuff. You'll see a lot of these. There's a lot of different prices for these, but they're only useful at this part. A lot of have them. People send me things, and they're fun. It's fun to use, but then it's over, and then it's on my shelf. So if you get a nice one, then maybe hang it. I like that. This is called a sand spade, and it is nice that it's kind of purpose built to move this stuff around, but if you're creative, you can find other things to do this. One thing I do like about this particular one is it has a narrow end too, so when you're kind of finishing things up and moving things around rocks, it makes it really handy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure everything gets a little bit of this. A lot of times what they tell people to do too is they'll say build up the aquascape, kind of ramp it up the back. In reality though, what happens is within about 3 months, all the water and stuff moving through will just make it go flat again. So you can do that. There are some tricks sometimes that kind of help. So if you plant your rocks in a strategic way, I'm not necessarily going to do that today, but you could take your rocks and kind of make a border where it can't just slide out and fall down. Then you can build up areas. So if you want like it to be really tall and then kind of cascade down or something like that, you can use these things to create artificial barriers. I don't think it's going to travel well, so I won't be doing that. Put in a little bit more of that. And just for your reference, that is almost, that's all that's left, this part of the bucket. I have a drain, so I took one of these buckets, I got two stuck together. I didn't know what to do. So I took this one bucket and I just drilled holes all in it. And I was like, well great, that's not a super useful bucket now. Because the holes, water doesn't work. But I made it into a drain bucket. So I just put a bunch more holes in it. I put some of those cross-stitching things in the bottom of it to kind of catch the small things. And then you can rinse out the bags of laterite like nobody's business. Makes it really easy. And turns out I'm doing that all the time. All right. Let me get this. Oh, I'm making a mess. I'm sorry, next presenter. They won't know. Don't tell them. Don't tell anyone. Let me get this. Okay. Perfect. So you could stop here if you wanted to, or well, I'd probably add more. But you could stop with this and cap it with something nice. But what I like to do is I like to add a soil substrate. Don't have it in a bag because the nice people in the Aquarium Knoxville who sponsored this event they gave this light, this tank, this museum quality glass. It's from it's a Hydra brand tank, which is kind of off-brand. But right here in Knoxville is where they're distributed. So you're kind of buying local in a way. Buying local via Taiwan or wherever they make these. But this is a soil-based substrate. You can rinse this. You can add water and rinse this and do it, but I don't. I don't like working with it wet. A lot of people say you should. And when you fill up the tank, you're going to have a few floaters that you just pop them down and they will sink. Sometimes oxygen does get kind of caught up in these and will start to float around. But I'm going to put most of my layer, ooh, a little dust. Haha, I just do that for drama. Yeah, this dust is all good out, but it still works. All right. I'll take little sessions where I'll put an amount in, and push it around, we'll see how well we're covering everything. That is definitely going to need more. The only regret I've ever had with one of these setups is not adding enough substrate. It is really frustrating and difficult to plant in tanks that don't have enough. Now you might be like, oh man, all my tank's dirt now. But it'll make it a lot easier. A lot easier in the long run. The other tool that's really handy to use for this sort of stuff is this brush. Again, when it's dry, you can do that. This is a lot less dangerous on the glass than this thing. Well, maybe. I guess we're going to put that to the test. And I'm going to do the classic kind of push it up towards the back. Now, there's a lot of schools of thought, like on the layers and stuff. Some people like to see it, and some people don't. I like to see the different layers that are there. If you don't, though, the bottom layers that I put on, just leave like a finger length gap, and then this other stuff, just pour it down on top of it, and you'll never see it's in there. I really like looking at it, especially on the sides. I like to see the different layers. So there's a lot in there, but I think we could go more. Okay.
Is that like a 5-gallon bag? What's that?
Bag, it came in a giant bag.
Okay.
It came in like a 50-gallon bag, and I was like, okay, I'm putting that in a bucket. Okay. There's a lot of different brands of Aqua soil. I believe this one's called Aqua Solium. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, there's Fluval Stratum. It's almost the same stuff. ADA makes Amazonia is more of an expensive brand and stuff. I usually have a mail order when I get that. A lot of them work in a very similar way. They do make the water more acidic. It's great for shrimp. Shrimp really like it. Plants love it. In the short term, you may see a spike in ammonia, like over to the first 24 hours or something. I recommend what you do with a tank like this is you fill it up and give it a quick water change maybe the next day. And just kind of get some of the stuff that immediately comes out of the soil, kind of get it out of there. And or use it to kind of kickstart a cycle if you're doing fresh and you don't have anything else going. Like most of us have tanks already, and we're going to take things from those tanks and put it in there to help. But if you don't have stuff like that, you can actually use some of this to sort of kickstart that cycle against those things. It provides an ammonia that can be broken down and stuff. All right, so once you get to this point, it's all about decorating and trying to decide what you want to do. When I start to think about an aquascape, I like to take and sort of imagine like where the flow of water is coming from, and start there. It really helps. Like I don't have a filter on this or anything, but it kind of, if you imagine like, okay, the flow of water is going to be coming in and kind of going this way, and in nature, water is just kind of push things in a certain direction. So you can tell, like, if there's a limb, if there's something like that, it's all going to be kind of going in the direction the water is kind of directing it. If you look on rocks and stuff, the rocks I brought today, this is called dragonstone. This is something that even a few years ago was really difficult to find, and really difficult to get yourself to mail because rocks are heavy. And mail ordering rocks just makes you feel silly. But I did it a lot. My mailman hated me. He's like, oh my God, it's that dude that just buys rocks. These are a little bit lighter, so they ship a little bit more, and now you can get these everywhere. You can get them at both the great fish stores in town. You can get them at PetSmart now in these big boxes. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my gosh. Now they do it? I spent 10 years trying to find this stuff in Facebook groups and eBay and Aqua and stuff, and now just get it. People are spoiled. If you look at rocks, whatever rock you pick out, they all have kind of a pattern and they have lines, and you kind of get used to kind of looking at the different lines and things. What looks best is if you kind of sort of establish a pattern. I like to start with something called the keystone. That's the biggest rock. And then you kind of work your way down. If you have 3 major stones, I haven't decided what all I want to use here. So you take your 3 biggest, and you figure out how you want them to be. It's perfectly okay to move things around, see what works best. If you get some colors that are a little different, all of these are recycled from my tanks. Like another thing that's great too, like when you break down a tank, always keep the hardscape and stuff. Just dry it out. You can use it again, and eventually you got a garage full of this stuff. People will be jealous. How did you get so many rocks? I don't throw away. Ever. Now in this case, I think I'm going to do it's a little bit symmetrical. So what I think I'd like to do a little durability test on the light. Good light, it works. I want to actually shift it to make it a little asymmetrical this way. And I'm leaving some gaps here for some wood. That's kind of probably so I like to leave an area in the back for stem plants. Stem plants are the best, easiest way to make these background things, or maybe oversized plants. Maybe you got a big Amazon sword, or any of these other kind of puffy plants that you can fill in the back. The other thing I like to do is when I make a hardscape, I make sure my hand can get all the way around it because I'm going to clean that glass. And there's nothing that sucks more than you have a branch that's up against the glass and you can never clean it. If you guys, when you're cleaning your tanks too, if you haven't ever tried it, this is an old key card. This is what I used to clock in with. But yeah, any of these plastic cards, these old plastic cards and stuff, they never scratch. Like you scrape and scrape and scrape and scrape and they never scratch, but they're great on algae, and everybody's got one. You know, pull out a debit card, or if you're in the Dave Ramsey thing, next time you're cutting one up, maybe keep some of it, and then use it to clean your glass. So I've got, there's a lot of different kinds of wood to use too. I guess I should say too, the ammonia and stuff that happens here, that's because this is sometimes they'll describe soils as reactive. Anything that you put in your tank that might change the pH and stuff, anything with a lot of calcium is going to make it more base, and things like this make it more acidic. These are completely neutral. The fluoride's a neutral element. This is a neutral element, so there's nothing, these won't cause any reaction. The same's true with this wood. This is manzanita wood. And it is usually you see this has been pressure washed and stuff. This is real branchy stuff that I got at a fish swamp not too long ago. And it makes aquascaping super because it just looks good. So I like to lay this in here. I'll play with this a little bit. What I like to do with the rocks and wood mixed together is create like a bouquet. We're going to kind of integrate these in together. Let me turn this down a little bit. I like to integrate them together into sort of a bouquet. I'll have like a cluster of rocks, some wood coming out, and then you shove the nucleus all in between the cracks, so it kind of looks like it's all together and supposed to be one thing. Let's see. Oh, that's easy. Make this a little bit shorter here. How to look weak in front of hundreds? Okay, there we go. All right. Turn this down a little bit. A little branch in here. Just stuck this rock right. No, it's fine. There we go. Move you into here. This particular substrate, the soil substrates, they're like little BBs. They're all like a bunch of little balls, and it can be extremely frustrating. Like, so you're gonna keep in mind that as you fill this up with water, you're gonna have to kind of go back and readjust, so you kind of get it approximately where you want it. And because this is open, we can just like let it extend all the way out the top too. So what I would do next, we've got a little bit of wood in there, a little bit of rock in there. I'll start maybe filling in some areas. You want to hide any unnatural cuts, both in the rock and the wood. I want to just make those kind of secret. Push everything up a little bit. Keep in mind as you place things too, kind of keep that direction going in the direction you want. I'm imagining the water's kind of going this way. I like to leave a little bit of a negative area that, where your fish can kind of swim around, a little bit more of an open area and stuff. And you'll find that if you feed them, and if you create kind of a stage or something like that, and then you feed them there, it's really easy to photograph them. You get them used to always come, they'll be at that side of the tank waiting for you every time you walk over. So you can kind of create a nice little set and then and kind of engineer what you want to see as far as behavior from your fish and stuff. So it's all kind of down to a personal taste. There's a lot of different types of wood. I find manzanita to be the least difficult to work with. I really liked, for a long time, my big go-to wood was the, like the mapani wood, and those ones that you don't have to, that will just sink. The big frustrating thing with a lot of aquascapes too is you get your wood just right, you put the water in, and it just floats away. I've had whole aquascapes on live streams just upturned because the wood just like, I'm floating now, and all the plants and everything go everywhere. But usually you can soak them. These little branchy things aren't a problem. You pin them down with some rocks, and they'll stay. The big, heavier, thicker ones, you might want to boil them or soak them somehow. I've got a giant garbage can at home now. It's about a 50-gallon garbage can, and I'm using it to soak some giant pieces of driftwood for a 210 that I'm putting together, and whew, it's crazy. So it's a lot of wood to soak. It gets a little bit more complicated the bigger it gets. These little branchy things, if you can get them though, they work great. Usually you can pin them down with a couple of rocks, and that's all you need. So after you get your, I guess I can come look at it. That's what George Farmer does.
Yes.
Every thumbnail. He enjoys watching. All right. So that dirt off there. So I like it okay. I kind of never like it till the plants are all stuck in there. But there's a lot of opportunities here. If you had a nubius, you can stick them all through this way. If you did some Monte Carlo or some carpeting plants, you got plenty of room for it to run around. Your carpeting plants and things like that, the nutrients in the tank are going to be at their maximum right after you plant. And that's going to make it kind of tough with algae. So the first couple of weeks after you plant a tank, especially if you use this method, you're going to want to keep up on your water changes. You will not be able to avoid the initial onset of algae. Just pick at it and pick at it. Stay vigilant, do your water changes, and eventually it'll all calm down and you'll get a nice planted tank that'll last you a long time. It's really funny once they get past that, those terrible twos. I've had a couple of tanks where I really wanted to give up on them, and then 2 years later, suddenly they look perfect. And I'm so glad I didn't give up on it, just kind of let them go. But man, is that a long time to wait. Like nobody wants to wait. But everybody that's a fish keeper, they know that patience wins out. And it's true with planted tanks too. Plan long term, put stuff inside of here that's gonna last a long, long time. The other method to go is dirted tanks. Have you heard like Dustin's fish tanks out there? He's kind of famous for talking about that. It's a very inexpensive way to go. I do find it makes a lot of algae though. It can be difficult. You grow amazing plants in there though. Like it grows plants in ways that I've not seen in any other kind of setup, but you do have to endure a lot of algae. It is, in my opinion, it's a lot higher maintenance. But another very valid, very good method. Does anybody have any questions? I've just been kind of rambling on and on, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have some.
So you got it all set up, it's cooking. About how long can you keep it before it starts to deteriorate, or I need to change something out, or a year, 2 years? How long?
Using the exact same thing that I've got, at least one tank at home is 15 years, and it's still going. I'm going to tear it down, but it's because my canister broke, and I think I broke my stand. I think my stand might go in any day, so just like roll of the dice every day. I don't just take care of that, but it's still growing plants, and that laterite that fluoride in the bottom, I think makes it a big difference. Like it lasts forever. So what's great about clay and clay-based things is that they absorb. I think it's science bros don't get mad at me. I think they absorb negative ions. So ammonia and different things that come into your tank, they get absorbed into that clay. Then the plant roots come down and they tap into those stores inside of the clay, and then they suck them out. So we kind of got this endless cycle of the clay absorbing nutrients and the plants pulling it back out to use as food. So that's why I put I like the heavy clay stuff at the bottom. And it seems to give a lot of longevity to tanks. Anybody else?
Do you use any kind of adhesive or anything to fuse your elements together, or do you just kind of let it?
Yeah, you can use super glue, especially if you get something pesky. You can use super glue to put it together. You have to watch because it kind of has a white crust that comes out. So you can do clever things like take the substrate and grind it up into a dust and put it on top of it and sort of hide that white crusty stuff. A lot of times I'll tie stuff on. The plant that grows super well in my house is Anubias. So I just wedge it into stuff. I just kind of find little advantageous ways to stick it in little nooks and crannies everywhere. But I have glued, especially Java fern, if I want to just a specific spot, you can glue it, kind of do it a little bit behind maybe. Just know that glue you'll see, unless you do something to cover it up. But it's perfectly safe to do that. Do you have a question?
Me? No, I'm good.
Yeah.
So on one of my tanks, it's an older tank, I guess it's about 8 years old, and it's still growing plants, but what I've noticed is that, everyone's noticed, is that the whole thing looks beautiful except for underneath the line, the substrate line, where there's grown algae down.
Down past the dirt line, yeah.
Yeah, any,
Really, the only thing you can do is try to push it back and scrape it down, and it's tough. I've always got something bad. Don't photograph that part. No one knows.
That's what I've been doing.
Shoot around it. That's fine.
Did you nice good border around the bottom of it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, and it kind of happens to everybody. Yeah, the best I've ever been able to do is try to push it back a little bit, hold it back with one hand, and take that credit card and scrape it. Just be careful when you're digging around, especially if you've got sand down there and stuff, because you'll scrape your glass if you get too crazy. I've done that too. Sometimes the only place I'll use a razor blade is down there, because it is so annoying, it's so difficult to get off.
Are these the raffle tickets that's in our bag?
Yeah. If you look on the table over there, you can rip them off and you can take this home, maybe.
Stuff the green project.
If you put a layer of sand over it, will it help the dirt from flowing?
It will. It will a bit. I've actually capped this with sand, kind of like you would do like a dirted tank and stuff. I've actually put stuff like this down and then capped it with sand to see how it do, and it actually does pretty good. It doesn't do bad. One other thing sometimes that I'll do too is I brought this out, I completely forgot about it. So as you're adding plants and stuff, sometimes it's difficult to keep them in the substrate, especially right after you get water. You put a plant in and it comes out. You put a plant in and it comes out. But you can add, I've got some decorative gravel that you won't see. Eventually it's going to get absorbed into this stuff and kind of into the mix, and you won't see it very long. But while you're planting, it is super handy to kind of maybe you're going to put a stem plant in, and just as you're doing that, you put a little pile of gravel and with it to kind of use it to weight it down, and then you spread that around, and then you've got a nice look. I love this color gravel. It's really similar to that color. So if you try to match your rock colors and stuff, it'll look like little fragments of it and stuff. But eventually, the plants will cover it all up, or it'll get mixed in there. So it's not like a long-term thing, but it's great to kind of help you plant into the substrate, because it can be a little tricky. That's another reason to put the crunchy layer down at the bottom. If you're planting it in, if you can get that plant, like a stem plant, all the way down into the crunchy layer and kind of swirl it around a little bit, it'll fill back in, and it'll pinch that and keep that plant in there. It makes it a lot easier.
Do you still use fertilizer, or do you use that in place of fertilizer?
I very rarely use fertilizer, and it's only, I've used it and it works. But you really need to be consistent with it, or you can get problems. It's another thing where you kind of, if so long as you're very consistent in doing the same thing, and during the furlough, and when I was at home all the time, I was at home just kind of looking at my tanks all the time. I would like add a little bit like flourish. I like the flourish iron sometimes, and just the regular flourish. I love those particular ones. I'll put a little pump on it because you can dose just by how many squirts you do. That's easier here. 1, 2. And I would go around and add that, but I didn't see such a significant gain with that it's made it where I feel like I need to do it or I have to do it. This will provide you at first too many nutrients. Over the years it'll start to decline, but by that time hopefully your plants have grown down into here, and maybe you've got more of an established ecosystem with fish that produce waste.
Plenty of mulm and stuff.
Yeah, fish or other creatures in there that produce waste, and that will become the fertilizer, though. If it all works out. What you got?
For this type of soil, over time I've used it, it'll break down to like powder.
Yeah,
Do you ever replace it, like take off this first layer and then add some new?
you can. I tend to keep my tanks for about, most of them, they usually live about 5 or 6 years or so before I break them. And it's usually lack of interest or I need. It's only because I make a lot of aquariums for videos. And there's only so much space in my home. So if something started, if I decided that I'm tired of looking at a tank, I'll break it down. And it's not because it couldn't like theoretically live on for years and years. But you can, like to redo a tank, I have on occasion pulled everything out, just taken that first couple of layers out and then left the bottom. So then you get all the benefit of all the bacteria and all the stuff that's kind of built up around the bottom of it. And you can get a fresh coat of substrate on the top. Different kinds break down at different levels, but most of them are about the same. I think fluvial stratum to me breaks down a little faster than the other ones do, but I've used it and I like it too. Anybody else?
Is there an advantage or disadvantage of using rocks versus a big piece of wood?
Well, rocks are generally inert, and sometimes wood isn't. Like sometimes it might stain your water or something like that, and none of that's unhealthy for your fish, but it might not be your favorite thing to see. I bought some wood, I think it's called ghost wood. They're like, it's manzanita, but it's a little bit more degraded and stuff. It's got all these cool holes in it. Trouble is, it turns it tea brown. And it's like, and I soaked it, I boiled it, and it's still, I put it in my aquarium, and the next day I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even see through it. I mean, it was completely brown. And eventually, after a lot of water changes, I got to come around. Sometimes they soften the water, all those things deteriorating kind of soften the water. And the other thing that happens is some woods slough off their wood a lot more than others, so you get things like, there's another driftwood. I'm blanking on it. What's the other heavy driftwood? It starts with an M.
Malaysian?
Malaysian drift, thank you. So Malaysian driftwood used to be my go-to. It would sink and it was really easy. But it sloughs off so much wood that your filters will always be full of this stuff's wood. Like you'll notice I've got 2 tanks. One's got Malaysian driftwood, one's got like spider wood, which is azalea roots, by the way. But the spider wood, the filters are clean all the time. Like there's never any debris in it and stuff. And the other ones are completely clogged. Like the wood that comes off of that, off manzanita or Malaysian driftwood, will completely clog up your filter. So that's something to consider too that you don't really get with rocks. The other cool thing you can do with rocks is if it gets really, really algae-fied, especially the flat ones like the river rocks and stuff, they start looking at you, you just flip them over. 6 months later, you flip them over again. All the algae on it dies, and then it looks great again. With wood, that's a little tougher, but it can be done too. Any other questions?
When replacing large pieces, are there any considerations about like the chemistry of the tank or creating dead zones like there would be in saltwater or not?
Well, so I'm of kind of two minds. Like, I was always told that you really need a lot of flow around the aquarium, but then I've experienced some other tanks now where they have no filter at all. Like, I went to visit LR Bricks. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this stuff. But this is a dude who has a house with over 300 aquariums. None of them have filters. They're all just full of fish. And I was like, well, what? Shouldn't you move the water around? You know, shouldn't it? And he goes, well, they're all swimming. He's got a bunch of little fans in there moving the water around. I was like, oh, I guess so. But it works for him. Like, it worked great. I set up my first no filter tank at the end of last year, and I'll be damned, it's doing just fine. Doing just fine with no filter at all and stuff. It's a little bit more algae in, like I was saying. It's a dirted tank with a soil set like that. Not this kind of soil, but like potting soil. And then what is it? Not Alaskan sand, pool filter sand on top of it. That's the cheapest way to do a scenario like this. But again, in my opinion, you get a lot of algae and stuff out of it. Grows plants great. Grows algae great too. Fancy to try to remember. I got off track. Anybody else?